Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us today. I'm Andrew Donoghue, Global Director of Analyst Relations at Vertiv. For those of you who don't know, Vertiv is a global provider of critical digital infrastructure that works across sectors including the data center, communications, and commercial and industrial. So for the next 30 minutes or so, we're going to dig into some pretty exciting research that Vertiv and the analyst team at STL Partners has conducted into edge computing and edge data centers specifically. Hopefully by the end of this live event, you should come away with insights on not only how the edge is really developing, including in key verticals, but also some specific guidance on deploying physical infrastructure at the edge. Importantly, we're going to explore how developing at the edge requires an ecosystem of different players, including channel partners. The edge is complicated, which is why the right technology, services, and support is critical. As is usual, we want to make sure this live event is as interactive as possible. So please feel free to post comments and questions throughout via LinkedIn or whatever platform you're viewing this through. We'll do our best to address them as we go, and at the end of the session, a replay will also be made available. So before we get into the discussion, I just wanted to give a bit of context on the edge research that's really the foundation of what we're going to be talking about today. Obviously, one of the perennial questions around the edge and edge computing is, what actually is it? We could easily spend the next 30 minutes discussing that, but hopefully most of you will have at least a working definition of your own. In 2018, partially in response to that definition question, Vertiv released a report called Defining 4 Edge Archetypes and Their Technology Requirements, which really provided a framework for categorizing edge use cases. The 4 archetypes: data intensive, human latency sensitive, machine to machine latency sensitive, and life critical, help to provide some structure around the edge and support initial planning. However, the original research didn't provide a lot of detail about actual edge deployments or data center infrastructure, as even 3 years ago, edge compute was still quite nascent. But as edge has increasingly moved from theory to reality, we realize that customers, partners, and Vertiv itself would benefit from some more specific guidance on deploying data centers and other physical infrastructure at the edge. So to that end, we've now launched Edge Archetypes 2.0, which takes the original research and translates it into 4 infrastructure models to provide that more hands-on guidance. The term infrastructure is used instead of data center, as not every edge deployment can be described as a data center form factor per se. So going through those, we have the device edge. The computer's at the end device. It's either built into the device, like a smart video camera with artificial intelligence, or is in a add-on edge, standalone form factor that directly attaches to the device. Then we have micro edge, which is a kind of a smaller standalone solution that ranges in size from 1 or 2 servers up to 4 racks. It's often deployed at the enterprise's own site, which could be a manufacturer where it sits on the shop floor or the factory or in a back office. Then we have the distributed edge data center, which is a small sub-20 rack data center that is situated at the enterprise site, telco network facility, or a regional site. Finally, we have the regional edge data center, which is a facility located outside of the core data center hub. This is typically a facility that's purpose-built to host compute infrastructure and shares features of a hyperscale data center. We don't have time to kind of dig too much more deeply into the specifics of the models right now, but if you head to vertiv.com or scan the QR code that will appear on a screen, you can download the full report and access an interactive tool which will help bring those models to life. When you're ready, also connect you with specific edge products and services from Vertiv's and also importantly our partners. So you will be pleased to hear that it's not just me who's going to be talking today. I'm joined by 3 panelists who are going to help illuminate those areas we promised to address. I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves each in turn, but to help us learn a little bit more about them, and also just for a bit of fun, in keeping with the edge theme, I'm also going to ask them to tell us all what's the edgiest thing that they've done recently, obviously within bounds of good taste. And obviously feel free to post your own comments around this as well. For me, edge events edgy events are few and far between, but I have to say that even getting on a plane recently for the first time in more than a year felt pretty edgy, as I'm sure it did to others as well. So yeah, let's head over to hear from the panelists now. So over to you, Dahlia, first, who should be making an appearance. There we go. Hi, Dahlia. Hi. Why don't you tell us about yourself, and you know, if you've got anything edgy you can share, please go for it.
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. Looking forward to the panel today. My name is Dahlia Deeb, and I'm a director and the Edge Computing Practice Lead at STL Partners. For those who are less aware of STL Partners, we are a research consulting firm based in the UK, but we do work globally, more focused on the telecoms industry, but through our Edge practice, doing quite a bit of work on, you know, the data center industry and other adjacent, let's say, ecosystems industries that touch on edge computing, and worked with Andrew and the team on a piece of research recently around the infrastructure models. I guess in terms of the edgiest thing I've done, so I had to spend a longer time on this question than the other questions we have for the panel. But I suppose, yeah, one of the edgy things I've done recently is start a dodgeball team. So I would say that's quite an edgy sport, probably, compared to most. And yeah, and that's still going. So that's my bit of edge to the table.
Fantastic. Dodgeball. I didn't see that one coming. So
yeah, it's a new side of me, Andrew.
Fantastic. Okay, great. Let's hear from Martin next.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. Good morning, good afternoon. My name is Martin Olson, and I'm Global VP of Edge Strategy and Transformation here at Vertiv. So I've spent the past 20 years in critical infrastructure. In the last 4 years here, I've had the pleasure of guiding our global product and engineering teams on roadmaps to align with the rapid evolution in edge computing space here. So I get to spend much of my time talking to customers and our partners and industry peers to understand how this phenomenon, edge, is evolving, and how Vertiv can best help our customers solve for these challenges here as we move further into these unconventional spaces. In terms of the most edgiest thing, I mean, I was going to agree with Andrew there that if you'd asked me a few months ago, it was probably flying on one big metal bird or relearning etiquette and how to interact with people in real life again. But I'll probably say the edgiest thing I've done recently, and it's also a first for me, has been officiating my oldest daughter's wedding here about a little over a week ago. So it's a first for me, and also getting to the point in your life where you're giving away your daughter's hand in marriage feels pretty edgy as well. So absolute privilege and just a very proud moment as a dad, obviously, but yeah, a little tense and a little edgy for me.
Well, thanks for that, Martin. That's great. And then finally we have Pete.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today, wherever you may be in the world. My name is Pete Klanian, and I'm responsible for our business serving and supporting our channel partners and customers in both the commercial and federal space in North America. I've been with Vertiv a year and a half. Prior to that, spent many years at Dell. In terms of the edgiest thing I've done, I'm going to follow Martin's lead and talk a little bit about my oldest daughter. We visited her, my wife and I, at her college last weekend, and we went to a college football game, American football, of course, and tailgating is a tradition here. So barbecues and parking lots and having a little party before the game. And there is an apartment complex on the border of the campus called The Edge. And the Edge apartment complex is where we did our tailgate. So I literally had a party at The Edge. That's the edgiest thing I've done in a while.
Well, that's great, but I'm not sure we can top that, having a party at The Edge. So fantastic. Great. Well, thanks guys for that introduction. Let's probably dive into the specifics a little bit here. So we're kind of going to go into the kind of first discussion topic, which is kind of a bit of a level set around the state of the edge. The research has some analysis around this. according to the Archetypes 2.0 research, the total number of edge sites is estimated to grow by more than 200% from 2019 to 2025. So that's obviously a pretty big increase in scale. And 49% of enterprises in specific industries are actively exploring edge computing. But how much of that is really reflected in the maturity of edge deployment plans across the board? We've done some initial customer research that seems to show the majority of organizations are actually planning or deploying edge right now. Interestingly, around 15% expect to use some kind of service provider to support their edge rollout, which could be in addition to or instead of owning and operating their own infrastructure. And I think this is quite an interesting area about who will actually own and operate the edge, as well as obviously make use of its services. We should also note that 30% of people have no direct edge plans in place right now. Perhaps that may just be because they're still sort of lacking guidance and still scoping out what their edge strategy will be, which hopefully sessions like this and the research will help support. I also wanted to give a reminder to the audience to obviously to continue to submit your questions and thoughts via the comments section or whatever is available to you. But let's kick off with maybe just asking Dahlia, what do you see as the state of edge computing right now, and sort of any thoughts about how it's going to evolve in the sort of nearer and long term?
Sure. Thanks, Andrew. I mean, I think in the last, say, 12 to 18 months, there has been a shift within the edge compute market. We've done some research tracking investments, for example, so kind of M&A and sort of minority investments in different companies in the edge ecosystem. And I think what we saw, let's say, prior to 2020 is most investments was going into facility and these, regional and distributed edge data centers we'll talk a lot about today. But in the last 18 months, there's been a shift towards other parts of the value chain. So, we've seen that there's about $12 billion that's gone in that time frame into facilities and data centers. But at the same time, we're seeing investments in the hardware, so silicon and servers and such like to be optimized for edge, about $700 million in that. And then, similar amounts of about $530 million in that edge cloud infrastructure, which is quite interesting because of, on that, in the survey, it showed that there's this demand for edge service providers. So some of that innovation happening in the software layer is going to be important for that. So I think that's one signal, which is there is a shift away, not just from building the foundation, which is a facility, but also in, getting closer to the applications and the use cases that will drive demand for edge. Then I think in our, on our research where we spoke to, I think it was over 20, we did 20 interviews, quite in-depth interviews with verticals in manufacturing, telecoms, retail, and healthcare. There are a few themes that came out. One is this move for early adopters, at least. The last few years has been about doing proof of concepts for maybe some specific use cases. Now I think there's recognition for a need for a more top-down approach when it comes to planning the edge, because the edge is not just a standalone piece of infrastructure. It's really thinking about your cloud and your edge and your data center infrastructure as a distributed kind of spectrum of computing and capacity. So that's a bit of a shift, and it's meant that those responsible for edge are, now it's kind of higher levels of the organization, say the CIO, for example, and others who are responsible for that. I think the second theme that's come out as well, which we'll see more of going forward, is also how you scale the edge. So in a similar vein, if you're an enterprise or even a solution provider, today you might have been deploying edge for your first site or your first couple of sites, and now the question is, how do you scale that? So if you're a retailer and if you've got thousands of retail shops, how do you scale that effectively? Bearing in mind there are going to be differences at each of those sites. There'll be networking connectivity challenges that you'll face. There's different capacity available, and that's where I think those archetypes and the infrastructure models we've come up with help to navigate that, because it's, should you be adding on a small computing device to, your existing equipment on site because you're very space limited, or do you have the ability to potentially build a small kind of distributed edge data center on site? So it's those types of things that I think enterprises are trying to grapple with. And then the last thing that I think we've seen is a bit more of an understanding on use cases. So I think, the work you guys did on the archetypes 3-4 years ago now was great in really understanding what are the different types of use cases. And you came up with, the kind of, there's a life critical category of use cases versus the sort of human latency type of use cases where AR and VR fit in. I think what's clear now is that those use cases aren't moving at the same speed. And as you'd expect, use cases that are, for providing life critical kind of mechanisms, things like remote surgery that we hear about a lot, there's obviously much longer term. So today, the deployments that we're seeing in terms of edge use cases are more around, IoT, so some kind of M2M latency sensitive use cases, or use cases around enriching the consumer experience, customer experience in the media space. That's what's kind of happening today. And then once, the infrastructure is there and also regulation and other factors catch up, then you can, implement these more mission critical use cases as well. So I think, that's some of the themes that we've seen come up in terms of where edge is at.
Great. That was a great comprehensive answer to the question. So thanks. Yeah, and I think the whole kind of issue of scalability is definitely a really important one. I think as edge grows and becomes more mature, that whole scalability challenge is going to be a big one. This could be some of the biggest IT infrastructure projects that organizations have faced if the projections for the edge are really come to pass. So any other thoughts from Pete, Martin, around any of the things that Dahlia covered there?
Yeah, I think Dahlia brought up some great points there, and the way I kind of think of it is it's sort of 3 stages to I think edge computing, at least from the vantage point we have right now. One is the digitizing the business experience economy, autonomy of things, not to be confused with Internet of Things, but autonomy of everything out there. So digitizing the business is that's accelerating right now. That's what we're seeing now. That's enterprise creating value from data. We're seeing that in brick and mortar retail moving to e-commerce. We've seen that in retail real-time access to data for delivering better patient care, supply chain management, manufacturing. It's a streaming content that goes in. The next sort of stage in it, not necessarily fully sequential, is that experience economy. We're seeing that momentum building right now, and that's your connecting and personalizing the retail experience and any experience really that you have as you go interact with the world here, remote medical diagnosis and surgery, smart cities. And then the last one, autonomy of things, more proof of concepts right now. I think momentum is starting to taking shape in that. I think we're starting to see some acceleration of 3+ years from now, really in that, and that's your sensing with Internet of Things, inference analysis happening in real time, being able to make some immediate decisions, oftentimes autonomously through AI and machine learning. So that's where your autonomous transportation, logistics, self-optimizing, processes coming about in there.
Great. Thanks for the input, Martin. We do need to kind of press on, but just before we leave this topic, Dahlia, I know you spent some time or have some expertise around the Middle East, and we have a question around. Are there any kind of specific deployments or experience you've seen as far as edge growth in the sort of EMEA region you could touch on quickly?
Yeah, I mean, I think in a nutshell, most of the traction in the Middle East right now is really in that regional edge data center sort of part of the edge compute infrastructure models, partly driven by governments wanting to build a kind of a digital economy and create data center hubs within those countries. I guess you've also got in some more advanced markets in Middle East and Africa 5G, but in let's say sub-Saharan Africa, it's the introduction of 3G and 4G and just enabling the kind of the consumer digital experiences that are already apparent in other markets. And it's kind of, I guess, a clear indicator of that is some of the news last week with Etisalat being one of the biggest telecoms providers in the region, merging with, I think it was G42 to create this new joint venture for data center build and a new business there. So that's where a lot of the traction is happening. I think the other area is probably the micro edge, so having edge computing at site, and that's really to, I guess, implement automation in things like ports or in manufacturing sites, oil and gas sites, those types of things, partly to connect them, and then also, automate processes, improve health and safety, improve quality, reduce, supply chain times, all these things that are, some of the trends driving that at the moment there. Great.
Thanks for that insight. We better press on, but obviously the kind of regional dimension to the edge is important. So if you've got any comments or questions around that topic, then please drop them into the comments box, and we'll hopefully address them at the end or offline. So let's move into the second of the three discussion areas now, and this is kind of double down into the edge infrastructure models in a little bit more depth and looking at verticals. Again, we've conducted some additional research here, which shows that from a vertical perspective, manufacturing and telecoms are leading areas when it comes to edge adoption. So Martin, as Vertiv's resident edge expert, it would be great if you could lead us through this topic a little bit. And once again, obviously to the audience, please submit your questions and comments. Martin, are we seeing edge deployed in specific industries more than others from your perspective? Are any kind of more advanced than others right now?
Yeah, I think we do. I mean, it all comes down to the advancement of any one of these use cases going to very much depend on mature business models being in place. So clear supply and demand of things. And some of those are a little fuzzy in some of the use cases we're talking about, and probably much clearer in some of the others. But if we're taking some of the industries that are really standing out here, some of the biggest ones going to be your manufacturing, or just in Industry 4.0 as we talk about it, retail and healthcare. And if you take manufacturing as a starting point here, it's probably the furthest ahead from an adoption standpoint, both technically as well as in practice, as well as geographically. In fact, if you go as far back as I think mid 90s, when Caterpillar debuted its first autonomous mining truck for open pit mining, in places like Chile and Australia, Indonesia and African continent. I mean, that was sort of your first venture into edge there, right? And it all comes down to highest yield, least amount of raw material and resources being put into it. So it's a cutthroat, vertical to be in. So every little thing matters. Fast forward to your semiconductor, your chip manufacturing, fabs, car manufacturing, more into what we would sort of look at as industrial IoT, industrial Internet of Things, where data is being generated at a rate of terabytes a day, just for a single plant, and to just rapidly analyze and implement the most efficient operating conditions here for the highest yield. Second one, looking at retail, is a very close second, and it's all about the online, or not just the online shopping experience, but really the end-to-end shopping experience. Could be connecting your browsing history of a product or a set of products at home in front of your computer, connecting that to the brick and mortar experience as you go into that store, all the way through to continue to be connected with whoever is providing that product or service to continue to help you optimize that. So really staying connected throughout that whole process there. And it's in addition to that, from a retail standpoint, it's the whole fulfillment side of it. When you sort of take the brick and mortar component out of it, and you're really doing everything online, then the fulfillment aspect becomes such a critical component in it to ensure that you have the right products in the right place, and you're able to deliver on the promise of some very, very short delivery times here that we've all come to expect from places like Amazon. So I think in terms of maturity for that, I think maybe plotting Amazon distribution centers may be an interesting bellwether for the maturity curve around the world in terms of what is in place from an infrastructure standpoint to support this. I think lastly, healthcare is the last and biggest ones here that I'll highlight. And it's obviously a really, really important one. And I think at this point, given the pandemic, I think all of us have probably experienced telehealth potentially one or more times at this point, talking to our doctor via this medium here. Just the ability to connect, patients anywhere in the world with expert medical professionals is just a game changer for civilization across the globe. So there's two parts to that. One is the access to care, and one is the access to affordable care. Where in many parts of the world today, access to care is the primary problem. Certainly in more developed countries, and then the other one is access to affordable care. So as we sort of look at the access to affordable care, for instance, that's all around improvement around accessing digitized patient records, being able to read your MRIs remotely with a medical expert that might be in different parts of the world. It's your wearable technology on your wrist that connects you to to a medical professional. In fact, just the other day, I connected my smartwatch to my doctor's office through a patient portal here that takes all the feeds in from the pharmacies I've gone to, the diagnostic centers, the other medical providers that I've seen here, which is pretty interesting to see all of this coming together here. So, those are probably the three key verticals where we're seeing the most progress there. And I think common for all of them is that as you look at it, this is, you got compute having to go into all of these different places, and just thinking through where these places are. They're highly unconventional spaces, not originally intended for compute critical infrastructure here. So there's some significant considerations around, design of them, the ruggedization of it, connectivity, security, and so forth.
That's really great. Thanks, Martin. Lots of points brought up there that we would love to kind of drill into in a bit more depth, but obviously, time is not our friend. I think, one takeaway is just trying to understand in those different verticals whether those organizations will own and operate their own edge infrastructure or be looking to service providers to provide that. I think that's one of the challenges, and whether those are existing service providers or new sort of edge service providers that are emerging. It's just something to try to understand. And obviously, actually how that edge is developed is something we're going to touch on in the next section, where we kind of look at the partners and the players in terms of deploying edge. Just quickly, also wanted to bring Dahlia in. We've had a question from the audience around telecom specifically, which is obviously one of SDL's focus areas, and how are you seeing edge manifest itself in the telecoms industry?
Yeah, I think the thing that's happening in the telecoms industry is, to some degree, it's been moving to the cloud from an IT perspective. So IT workloads are moving to the cloud. But what's more interesting, and where edge falls in, is this change in the core operations of a telecoms network, and network infrastructure is becoming, or has to some degree become, virtualized, and now it's moving to kind of a very software-based system. And so what that means is that telcos themselves are building data center-like facilities throughout their network, whether it's to host the 5G RAN or the 4G and 5G core network. So that's happening anyway. So they're using edge computing for their own, workloads and infrastructure. The second thing, though, at the same time, is that telcos are, positioning themselves as a potential service provider or data center operator in the edge space. So the idea there is that, to use those same data center facilities that they are running along their network to host others' workloads. So it could be, enterprise workloads or CDN or content providers, and either through, some kind of a colo model, or through a kind of a full end-to-end service provider model, or an IaaS model, or whatever it might be. So I think that's quite interesting. And the big question at the moment is, how deep will that edge go in the network? So ultimately, although we're not there yet, but ultimately telcos envision that you might have edge data centers by the base station. Again, not just running the access network workloads, but also enterprise application workloads. So that's super interesting, but the demand needs to catch up. So there isn't really yet applications that need like sub 5 millisecond latency, which is what you could potentially get with an edge data center at a base station. But that's, eventually where things will go once we have, some of these kind of like AR, VR drone applications, which do require that really kind of ultra reliable, low latency capabilities that comes with 5G. And just the second thing I wanted to mention actually as well, which is super interesting happening in telecoms, is the idea of having private 5G or 4G networks at customer sites. And so what's happening there is telcos or others are putting edge compute infrastructure, so kind of a micro edge at, say, a manufacturing site or an oil and gas site, which is going to run almost like a mini 5G network. And at the same time, you could use that same edge compute infrastructure for, again, like the applications, the automation systems, the applications as well. So those are the trends that we're seeing, and it's quite a complicated industry because it's because of this fact that it's both a customer of edge or a user of edge, also a service provider of edge too.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I mean, I think there's different challenges there from the telcos. As far as sort of being service, providers of edge, it's interesting to consider whether they will, the telecoms operators have the right business models in place to, take advantage of edge growth. Some could say that they kind of missed some of the boat a little bit around cloud, and were disrupted a little bit by the kind of cloud service providers. So, how mature are those telco edge strategies right now versus the other players? They're going to be vying for, a piece of this edge pie, if you like. So it's definitely one to look at. Okay, let's move into the final discussion topic here, which is around this whole idea of taking an ecosystem to build the edge. So as I think there are many elements that kind of influence the building of the edge: software, hardware, infrastructure, orchestration, and enterprises and other organizations are going to struggle to coordinate those on their own, which is where a partner network comes in. So we want to bring Pete in here as the sort of resident channel expert and just try to deconstruct a little bit about what role does the channel have to play in edge specifically, as you see it, Pete.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. So first of all, I don't think any customers are reaching out to our channel partners and saying, I need 3 pieces of edge today, right? What they've got is a business need. It could be a workload, it could be an application, it could be support for a business process. And what they need is the right technology in the right place, operating at high efficiency with no downtime and very low latency. So however we want to define the edge, what's important is that the technology is put together, configured properly, with the right level of expertise, delivered on time and supported with the right security levels, and as I mentioned earlier, the right level of compute. And that's exactly what our partners, our channel partners, have been built to do over the last 30, 40, 50 years. Now, the edge is no different. They need to understand all the different parts and pieces of what a customer needs to support their business process. They need to have the right understanding of how to consult customers on what their needs may be at those edge sites. And then they need to be able to aggregate all the different vendor solutions, deploy them and maintain them, and keep them secure over time. Take the example of Martin on his watch having medical records, or a retailer running thousands of transactions a minute. All of that needs to be highly secure. We don't want that getting out there, and we need someone that understands all the different elements of what it takes to set up and run the edge, and who better than the people that are doing that today in all kinds of technology areas, and that would be our channel partners. So it's a great opportunity for them to educate customers, support customers on their journey through the edge, and then support, maintain, and service these. Now, as a vendor, we need to make it easy for them. We need to provide the tools to support the work that they have to do. And of course, uptime being a key component of this, you need consistent power, the right physical location, and the right thermal or environmental and security setup in order to properly support that uptime. So Vertiv is here to support partners doing that, and we look forward to welcoming any partners into the program to help you support your customers.
Great. Thanks for that. I mean, just on that point, I mean, do you think necessarily the edges or some of these edge deployments that customers may be trying to manage are necessarily more complicated than, say, for example, on-premise data center infrastructure or rooms, closets, things like that they've had to manage before? And is there a greater role for channel partners because of that? Or do you think maybe it's around the scale which is the challenge?
I think depending on which archetype we use, there may be some additional complexity. If there are a number of edge sites, a highly distributed set of edge sites could be in very remote locations, could be in the middle of the desert, could be in a small network closet, and you don't have local staff to help support and service it. The channel partners that are supporting customers in their rollout of the edge need to take those factors into consideration and need to think through how to handle any service needs in those remote locations. So the more uptime and availability is needed, it's even more critical that is thought through up front and configured into the solution.
Okay, great, thank you. Any other thoughts around that from Martin or Dahlia?
I think, one thing that we're seeing, which it might be that the edge is accelerating or it's happening in parallel anyway, but I think it might be the former, which is because of the kind of the complexity that comes with edge infrastructure, and that you physically have more sites, you have more diversity in the nature of different sites and facilities. That is driving some innovation in the kind of the automation and orchestration piece, and trying to do that more centrally. So and a lot of that, I guess, is software driven. So it's kind of having software that's deployed at each of the edge locations, but is manageable in a centralized way. And I think that's what, I guess, that reduces the burden for the end enterprise, but also channel partners and other service providers. It helps them provide an easier service as well. So I think that's a little bit of maybe the difference between, as we move from a very centralized approach when it comes to compute infrastructure to a distributed approach. That's where a lot of the new services need to come along. Is how do you do this? How do you make that easier? So it's not a manual process of having necessarily just using a field service capability to manage that, but to also do some of that centrally and to monitor things in a central way as well.
Great. Thanks for that. Well, I think we might have to wind things up now, actually. We've run through this pretty quickly. Time always seems to fly when we're doing these things. So it just leaves me to say thanks to the panelists for the great discussion today, and to the audience for the comments and questions along the way. You can see the QR code up there again, which will enable you to download the report. You can also head to vertiv.com again, obviously, as I said, where you can interact with the online tool that we've developed to kind of dig into the edge models in more depth. And obviously keep an eye out for future Vertiv Live events. And thanks again to the great panel and for everyone joining today.
Thank you, Andrew.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thanks, Andrew. Thanks, everyone.